Mr. Watt, thanks for your time on Sky News today. Is the racial vilification part of the bill finished for good, or is the government going to work to bring it back at some point?
Hi, Alex. Good to be with you. No, look, we have removed the racial vilification part of this legislation. Of course, it was our preference that would be part of this bill. And in fact, the anti-Semitism envoy, Gillian Siegel, recommended that we make changes to legislation around racial vilification. So that would have been our preference to have that as part of this bill. But obviously, the Parliament has made clear that we won't have the support of either the Coalition or the Greens to do that. So we are removing that. What we are seeking to do this week, as you said in your introduction, is to pass two separate bills. One, to put in place a national gun buyback and also make other changes around gun laws that we can undertake as a federal government. And secondly, to deal with the very real problem of hate speech that Susan Lee, the Coalition and many others have been calling on us to act on. So this week, there's a test for them to see whether they can live up to their own rhetoric and work with us to limit the sort of hate speech that we all want to see taken out in Australia.
How frustrating is it to have not had more bipartisan support?
Well, as I say, it would have been our preference to see, after that terrible incident in Bondi, to see the Parliament come together and work together constructively in a bipartisan manner to deal with these issues. But of course, within a couple of days of that terrible incident, we saw the rampant politicisation of it by a range of coalition figures. Day after day before Christmas, we saw Susan Lee, on behalf of the opposition, demand that Parliament be recalled to legislate immediately. And now that we have recalled the Parliament, they say it's too rushed and we shouldn't be having it happen so quickly. We saw them day after day demand that we take action on racial vilification, that we take action on hate speech. And now they're saying that that's all too hard and we shouldn't act on it. So I think what that shows is that the attacks from the Coalition were always based on politics rather than actually trying to bring the country together in the way that we want to see happen.
Kevin Hogan, the Nationals deputy leader, told this show yesterday he didn't think there had been enough consultation, but the Prime Minister says he has been speaking to the Coalition. What's your understanding of how much dialogue there has been away from the public?
Well, the Prime Minister has made clear that he's spoken to Susan Lee as the opposition leader on a number of occasions, not just since Christmas, but before Christmas as well. So there's been plenty of dialogue with the opposition. And again, the comments from Kevin Hogan just demonstrate that the opposition was never serious in demanding for Parliament to be recalled, in demanding for urgent legislation, in demanding that we act on hate speech and racial vilification, because now that we've actually recalled the Parliament to sit much, much earlier than it normally would in any other year, they're all saying they don't want to deal with it. So, it's always just been a political attack. I think it's very disappointing after such a shocking terrorist incident that some parties in this Parliament have been more focused on the politics than on actually working together to make the country safe and to bring the country together.
Do you think we've already seen an example of how tricky it is to get the detail on racial vilification laws right? I'm talking about the protests in Sydney. Despite that ban, we saw pro-Palestinian rallies taking place with two controversial chants that are viewed as anti-Semitic by many Jewish groups. There were no arrests of those demonstrators, and yet we saw one Christian preacher being led away, as well as a man holding a Hamas is to blame sign. Does that underline just how tricky it is to draw a line and to get this detail right?
Look, these sorts of laws are always going to be complex. If they weren't complex, governments would have acted on them before now. But that's not to say you shouldn't try. And that's why we've made an incredibly earnest attempt since the Bondi incident to work with as many parties within the Parliament to come up with legislation that was right. We did think it was important to act urgently on this. And I think the Australian people expect us to act urgently when you have such a shocking incident occur on our own shores. That's why ministers, government officials have worked right through the Christmas period to draft this legislation, to come up with a solution to the problems that we face. As I say, we would have preferred that the racial vilification aspect remain in this legislation. But even if we can pass the legislation that now will be before the Parliament, that will make a big difference. It's important to take some of the guns off the streets, the guns that found their way into the hands of those terrorists. It's important to give governments power to ban and limit an association with hate groups. It's important to be able to prosecute in a serious way some of those hate preachers who are spilling the kind of vile hatred that has led to these sorts of incidents. And that's the issue this week, is that the coalition have got to make a decision about whether they're prepared to work with us to limit those hate speeches, to limit the guns, to limit a range of other activities that have generated this atmosphere, or whether they're going to keep playing politics.
Can I deal with some of the specific opposition you've had from the coalition and from the Greens? The coalition seeming concerned about the limits to free speech going forward, and the Greens seeming to be worried that there weren't equal protections put in place for other minority groups. Let me deal with that second one first, if you don't mind, Mr. Watt, just because there are some claiming that the Jewish community was the one that suffered these fatalities, this loss, so they specifically should deserve more protections. And equality sounds great in theory, but in practice, we've seen the worst terror attack on Australian soil target the Jewish community specifically. So is it not fair enough to kind of, worry about them first?
Well, that's why the legislation that we initially provided was dealing specifically with anti-Semitism, Alex. We recognised that the incident that occurred at Bondi was very clearly directed towards Jewish Australians, and we needed to act on that with prohibitions on vilification of Jewish people. I would have expected the coalition to support that, because they said that we needed to do that. We saw the Executive Council of Australian Jewry support the legislation that we put forward to deal with that. We did say that we were prepared to consider at a later stage some of the vilification of other groups within the community, but that we needed to act urgently when it came to anti-Semitism, and that's what we were seeking to do. The Parliament has obviously said that it's not prepared to do that. We haven't had the coalition support it. We haven't had the Greens support it. And that's why we've made that decision to proceed with the remainder of the legislation, which will still make a very big difference.
OK, just before you go, I just wanted to get your reaction to the reports this morning that the Liberal Party has postponed its review into last year's massive election defeat. Former leader Peter Dutton believes it contains defamatory claims. Are you surprised the opposition's pushing back publication of this report?
Yeah, I've seen those reports this morning, Alex, and I think that's just another indication of the constant turmoil we see the Liberal Party in. Even when they're in opposition, even after an election, they can't seem to reach agreement on anything. That's obviously been one of the factors that has driven their position when it comes to the hate speech laws. The level of hatred members of the Liberal Party have for each other seems to outweigh their concern about hatred within the community. And that extends to election reviews as well. At some point, the Liberal Party have got to work out, can they work together? Who is their leader? Are they going to have a unified front? And are they going to be in a position to work towards the interests of Australians rather than constantly turning on each other?
OK, Murray Watt, thanks for your time this morning. That's the Environment and Water Minister, Murray Watt, joining us.